let's figure this one out here. Way much better. Welcome to the Great Old Ones channel. Here I talk about role-playing games, and I love first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Tonight will be the retro game stream about AD&D 1E. The topic I had chosen for this evening was magic and house rules, because some of the things that are most misunderstood or the most commonly house rule things happens to be the magic system in AD&D 1E. So I'll mention that, and we'll complain about house ruling and all that stuff as time goes along. First things first, let me welcome, let's say we got Tillian, Dungeon Master D. Dungeon Master D, thank you very much for being officially my first supporter. We've got Ptolemachus, John Collins, Joe Kaufman, Doomswords. What is he doing out here already? Dr. John Smith, Rabbit, D6Y, okay, I'll cry havoc, yes, we can do so. Let's see, Gonzilla. Oh, Gonzalo's here to heckle me again one more night. All right. Well, we'll accept him and let him come on in. But again, fortunately, joining me to complain about house rules one more time, I'll bring in Doomswords to help me lay emphasis on complaining about house words. So without further ado, we will bring him on. All right, how you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. Well, still alive, which is better than the alternative. Yes.
Yeah, that's about the extent of it.
I don't know. A couple of guys on Monday night might like to change that condition. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Again, this week we'll go ahead and we'll talk about magic because I think it's probably somewhat misunderstood and some complained about and stuff. So we'll bring up some of those magic topics again. And in a sense, it's one of the more commonly house ruled things. We'll start with that too. So without further ado, I'll start bringing this stuff on right away. I better put my readers on so I can read what's going on here. I tried it without it for a minute or two. One of the most misunderstood aspects of magic, advancing magic in particular, which is much, much hated, was why would any magic user, anybody with any intelligence whatsoever, how could they possibly forget their spells? Well, technically, they're not really forgetting their spells. What's happening is they're releasing a magical energy that's been imprinted upon their brain. So I'll read this out here from the Player's Handbook. Which page was this I pulled out here? Page 39, character spells. Once cast, a spell is totally forgotten, gone. The mystical symbols impressed upon the brain carry power, and speaking, the spell discharges this power, draining all memory of the spell used. This does not preclude multiple memorization of the same spell, but it does preclude multiple uses of a single memorized but once. A spell memorized but once. When a spellcaster shoots his or her spell bolt, so to speak, it is gone. Right. So I go into detail a little bit here. As a rule of thumb, allow 15 minutes of game time for memorization of one spell level, i.e. a first level spell or a half the second level spell. Such activity requires mind rested by good sleep and nourished by the body. We talked about that a little bit earlier. But what's going on here is you're not memorizing spells per se. You are pre-casting them onto your brain during your preparation period. And this just imprints the magic on your brain, and then when you cast a spell, it's released. So in order to release multiple of the same spell, you have to memorize them multiple times. I think that was kind of either misunderstood or not read so much, and then people didn't care. So they quickly house rule this thing and make wizards now, instead of magic users, are wizards and sorcerers and stuff, and they can cast their spells an unlimited number of times based on their spell slots, as opposed to the idea here that the spell has been implanted into your brain and just released at casting time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I people do dislike the Vancian magic, like you said. At least a lot of people do, and you'll find a lot of different systems in play elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
but I think that what the Vancian magic does add is sort of a unique flavor and choice for the caster, right? Because you have to have the foresight as a player, or the character has to have the foresight, or however you want to look
Mhm.
at it, to know what to memorize beforehand. And there's no, hey, I'm gonna, I memorize magic missile, but I really need sleep, so let me dump this magic missile and grab this sleep. Yeah, it might be kind of harsh for the player of the spellcaster. If you
Mhm.
don't have the spell you need, but you actually know that spell, you just didn't happen to memorize it that day. I mean, that kind of sucks, right? But at the same time, it makes the game a lot more challenging and a lot more interesting
Sure.
in general. And that's something that, spell slot type of systems and spell point systems and stuff don't really have an easy way to replicate.
No, and this makes having scrolls and magic items that much more valuable for the magic user character, right? You can
Right.
cast, you threw your one magic missile for the day, but I've got a scroll here with three of it on that I can pull out and if necessary, to do additional ones. Or I'm carrying the scroll of sleep so that I can memorize more magic missile spells to account for where we're going in the dungeons and stuff. And originally it was you memorized all of your spells for that day. You left your spell book in your safe space there in town, didn't drag that 20-pound thing with you into the dungeon. You had to leave to go memorize some more. Um, the one
Right.
that I like that came through with Unearthed Arcana, there's not many of them, but that's one of them, was the idea of a traveling spell book. You had one that had a few spells in there that you brought with you. Yeah. Let's see, what do we got here? We'll add this comment in there. I think it's part of the deal is Rabbit is in some ways correct. Yes, balance the classes and the game. Um, Giving them more magic user more ability to be a lot more flexible gives them a lot more power compared to the other classes that they have. Man, here we go. Here's what Dungeon Master D. Again, thanks again, Dorian. Much appreciated. Right. They mimic and absorbs into their being, then leaves once words are uttered. It's not that they've forgotten the spell, they've released the energy off of their brain. And like I mentioned, house rules, right? This is one of the most commonly house ruled things. I think the only thing that is more commonly house ruled than the magic system is Nat 20. And it's to the point where Nat 20 should be banned words. So who we got with spell tables, spell classes? Let's see, what else did I have in here? Kick it over to the next tab. More on spell casting was here. This is page 40 through 47 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. We were talking about um, house ruling and stuff like this. The spell level, rest time, and stuff like this was listed on this table. But what we want to go back into is again on this page here, right? Right. The triggering action draws power from some plane of the multiverse, whether the spell is abjuration, conjuration, enchantment, or whatever. There's a flow of energy first from the spellcaster from some plane, the area of magic and spell to the caster. Energy's flow is not from the caster per se, it is from the utterance of the sounds, each of which is charged with energy, which is loosed when the proper formula and or ritual is completed with their utterance. Right? Again, this flows into the idea that the spell is pre-cast during your preparation, waiting to be released by you at the right moment. And by changing it to be you do the spell whenever you want, and then you're just using spell points or mana points or something like this, takes away from this, takes away from the idea of that is an exceptional amount of power that's coming from somewhere else manifesting for you to do it. And it brings a little more along the idea that it is your power coming out of the magic user that is causing the magic. So understanding that kind of helps um, the idea of house ruling magic and things, why it was written the way it was written in the books and stuff.
Right, right. And there's a pretty flavorful description of all that in there. And kind of the analogy that he uses of sort of the electrical wire between the appliance and the wall serving as the conduit through which the electricity passes is I think a good example of what he's trying to get across with how the Vancing magic system and idea works in general. You think of the magic user as the conduit, and the magic
Mm-hmm.
passes from one plane through him into the prime material plane or whatever plane he happens to be on. Right.
Sure. How would that work though if he's on the negative or positive material plane?
Yeah.
Drawing the energy from that plane. Well, I'm
He
already there.
explodes. Right.
All right, and here's another thing we'll get to. Can I highlight that? Oh, yes, I can. One of the other things that seems to be fairly commonly house ruled, because it has not been given a very adequate. Yeah. Well, before we move on, let's see. Page 42 is why it's hardcore Bible thumpers hated D&D. Right. Yeah, that's part of it too. Yeah. Why do you think it's so commonly house ruled? I've never actually seen anyone play like that in my time, so it's interesting. It's so common. Um, I think it's both. They just don't like it. They want to have everything at their disposal, right? We can see that in video games and things like that. All that stuff that come later is everybody has. They walk over. They got unlimited ammo. They got health stim packs every time they turn around. Um, they don't have to worry about recharge or anything like this. Everybody wants things instantaneously, and I think again, all this is one of the hills I'll die on is logistics and resource management is a fundamental part of this game, and taking that away from it takes away a fundamental piece of the game. I learned a lot about resource management from playing Dungeons and Dragons. We'll say that.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right. I mean, I was going to mention kind of the same thing, but that's not a surprise. I think we're sort of on the same page on this. Is that resource management being the fundamental sort of core mechanic of the game that everything else fits into.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's hardly a better example of properly managing resources than something like the magic user having to memorize his spells beforehand. And there's a differentiation between classes and what they can do. They're going back to the sort of the game balance thing. Yeah, I mean maybe magic users were punished a little unfairly occasionally, but then
Mm-hmm.
say a cleric. But that's what makes them so valuable and interesting to advance through the levels. Another common thing that's a house rule, very very common, is encumbrance. Coin weight and all
Yeah.
that stuff. Oh, there's no way these coins weigh a tenth of a pound each, and I've had huge arguments over that with people, such that I've gone completely berserk in trying to uh, justify that in sort of magic world physics and whatnot. But that's not even really the point. The point is that the coin weights are there for a reason,
Mm-hmm.
and it all ties together into this sort of under this umbrella of resource management that's at the core of the game. And that's where I learned most of that. I might be pretty poor at managing certain resources in real life, but others I'm better at, and I can thank the game for that.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it all ties in there together. Right. Spell components, memorization of spells. How many arrows are you carrying? How much weight do you carry in your gear? And oh well, yeah. Here we go. The most important resource to be managed is the beer, the ale. Right. Let's see. Demerla, Gandalf, I know, or Sparrowhawk have to memorize spells ahead of time. Wasn't Dancian magic system. Those were different types of spell systems. Merlin was more along the lines of charisma and influence. He didn't have too many spells that he did. Right, Gandalf along the same sort of thing. Gandalf was knowledge. He knew a lot of stuff. He cast a few, lighting pine cones on fire and that sort of thing. but not a whole lot more than that. Sparrowhawk, I got to remember that one. It's been ages since I've seen that. Ages. I mean, I've slept since then. So, but again, those were different magic systems from those stories, right? Those, as powerful, quote unquote, as Merlin was, he really wasn't all that powerful compared to, say, an advanced Dungeons and Dragons dungeon master. Where did the spell like idea even come from? Well, I think it's common um, now, trope for fantasy that wizards had their spell books and stuff like this with them. But it wasn't the first place that you'd seen somebody chanting things out of spells. Most of the time, those were, he was in the dungeon, he was performing some ritual, reading all this sort of thing out of a book, as opposed to carrying it around with him in the field. Scrolls, old stories, magical scrolls were more common to be seen used to cast spells in the field than somebody lugging around a heavy book. Right. Wizard of Earthsea. That one I'm not overly familiar with. Wizard of Earth. That one would, I think that is Gonzalo would be the expert on or an Earthsea, I believe. I'll have to pick his brain a little bit about that one. But different
He
style,
is into
different
all
books,
the
different
weird
styles of
stuff.
magic and stuff. Yeah. He says, "Well, I'm down with the idea. Sure. I, if you like the logistics aspects of it, keep it to things the way they are. And this is a game you can make whatever changes you want. I wanted to start with the house rules section of this is probably one of the more commonly house ruled items that's in there. Um, and adding on to this, why I highlighted Wall of Fire, it is not possible for the spellcaster to move at all and maintain concentration on the Wall of Fire. It is in several different spots in the books, page 75, 79, 95. Why did I put down 82? I can't remember why I put down 82. Where, and in the I think those are pages out of Player's Handbook where you might find spells that have concentration listed. And then in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's a few pieces like this one here. But it is never fully explained what exactly he means by concentration. And it changes a little bit from spell to spell as to what you can do and still maintain concentration. And some of them don't even have it at all, what concentration stuff is. So this is another part of the magic system that's house ruled because you don't get a whole lot of details in here what they really mean by house rule. Phantasmal Force. It's I didn't copy it. I should have put that on here too. Its particular concentration means you can move a little bit, but no strenuous activity or casting spells. That's what's the way it's listed in there for that particular spell. So I can move a little bit. What does that mean? You know, other spells say you cannot move whatsoever while you're concentrating on doing this thing at all, like this one particular here. Not possible spellcaster move at all and maintain concentration on the Wall of Fire. The chant spell, you have to remain motionless while you're chanting, because that's what is described in the particular spell. Plus, it takes a full turn to start chanting before you start getting the effect. And now that's house ruled, and yes, I've house ruled it myself. You know, some of the cleric spells seem to be less than useful if you read them and stick to rules as written. If you have to wait 10 minutes for your chant to start working, by that time, the monsters on the other side of the door know you're there. They're waiting for you. Your ambush has lost its potential.
Yeah, and
If there's,
that's sorry, but
uh,
that's something typically you also have to check with a lot of this stuff, right? I mean, you don't have to. You can just house rule something or do whatever it is that somebody else suggests, or look up the information on it to see what the commonly accepted interpretation of the rules is. But we have to remember that sometimes some of this stuff has been copy and pasted from elsewhere, from some sort of original D&D book, or one of the other brown books, one of the supplements like Greyhawk, or say Eldritch Wizardry, or something like that. And sometimes things slip through that something like a turn versus a round might slip through, and then you look at that and you realize, okay, well, this obviously means around, and turn is not necessarily the correct choice of word here. And it's just the nature of the way this stuff was written, and the editing process, and the period of time, and how quickly it was done. And you'll find a lot of that in a lot of places. So I always find it useful that if I'm having a problem with a particular thing and what it means, particularly when I'm trying to standardize some of this stuff, to look back at the original materials, and you'll often find the original intent in there if you care about that kind of thing.
Let's see. Well, let's go back to this one here. If there's a top 10 list of favorite house rules out there, it'd be fascinating to hear you guys break it down and discuss. Maybe you can quickly look that up online, see if there is one in top 10 house rules for AD&D 1E while I'm running on my other parts of this topic here. As far as spells, we mentioned this before. These are the pages out of the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. Start spell explanation starting on page 41. Some good hints and rules on how to do rulings on these particular spells. So if you ever got questions or anything like this, and here's a good place to start. Just read and look these up as to what goes on with the spells and what was he thinking with some of them. I wish he'd added more for some of them. Let's see. The problem I have with house rules is they seem to rest upon the assumption of deficiency, that a raw is broken or wrong, typically that it seems to come from a lack of understanding of the raw. And I fully agree with you right here. I don't like, well, the other part of it is I don't like that rule, so I want to change it. And one of the problems I've noticed with house rules and stuff like this is there seem to be skewed in favor more often than not of player characters, and the same rule doesn't apply to the other side, the monsters or your opponents. Right.
Yeah. If it's good for one, it's good for the other. And typically, if I'm house ruling something myself, it's ends up making things more complex, and that's generally my intent. Not necessarily complexity for the sake of complexity, but in order to put something together in my brain that I feel isn't necessarily a fully formed and coherent idea. And often it ends up being worse for the players than they would have liked it to be. But it's common, things like the natural 20s and critical hits and stuff like that. People have to remember that sure, you can put critical hits in the game, but if you put critical hits in this game, the players are going to suffer. And the players don't necessarily understand that until they do the suffering, right? Because let's say we have a first level party of adventurers, even third level party of adventurers. We got 4 adventurers or something. You got 15 goblins. Well, now these goblins, just law of probabilities says you're going to be critical hit about 3 times as often as you're going to critical hit them, and you don't even need to critical hit them in order to kill them, but they do need that. So it's a massive equalizer in the favor of the monsters, and there's nothing that kills characters more than critical hits. Even if you do critical hit mass damage, it's still highly skewed in favor of the monsters, just by virtue of their numbers. There's often far more monsters.
I can't remember what page it's on in the Dungeon Master's Guide. I should have that one imprinted on my brain. But he does talk about those sorts of things, that going in and changing things like that and creating rules and not understanding what the consequences of what those rules may be. A couple years back now, when I first started this channel, I did the rules as written video, and I talked about that sort of thing. When you change something, what are you breaking when you change this? What are you trying to fix that may break something else when you make those adjustments and changes? like we're talking here with magic. When you are changing from, oh, I don't like the advancing magic system, so you can cast whatever spell you got in your head. What does that break when you allow the wizards to do that? Okay, my opponent wizards are going to do the same thing to you. Right? They're going to have their list of spells memorized, and you're going to be doing something, and they're going to have, well, I'll just counter that because I can cast this spell instead, or I can throw this one 3 times at you instead of the 3 different spells that I had memorized. Turnabout is fair play, and like you said, you'll find that some changes like that, well intentioned or not, tend to punish players just by sheer numbers.
Yeah, and with regard to spell slots and or magic points or whatever, and being able to choose what you want at any given time,
Mm-hmm.
the DM's always going to have an advantage there because the DM's always going to know more about what's actually going on in
Mm-hmm.
the encounter, combat, world, whatever, than the players are going to know. And he's already armed with that knowledge, and needs to be a fair arbiter given that he knows so much. And all you're doing is asking him to be even more fair if you give him a huge advantage like that. Oh, so I can cast anything I want at any time, you know.
Well, there's nothing wrong with spell point systems, nothing wrong with mana systems, nothing wrong with being a sorcerer, being able to cast whatever spell and stuff that you have available to you. Those things are well and good as long as there's things built in with those rules that you created to do those things to balance it back out. Think about what you're changing and try to have a balance to it. Let's see. Spell components seem to be forgotten about a lot of times as well. Some spells are quite expensive. Yes, they are. And some of the spells with their ridiculous, the identify spell, and that's probably one of the most house ruled spells itself is the identify spell because there's a lot of sticklers for when you can cast it, what it does to you after you've cast it, what the requirements are for casting it, um, and it isn't a magic. Hey, I cast this. I know what this thing is and know what it does. I've got chances of getting pieces of it based on it, but I have to have a live miniature carp. Where did I keep that? In my pocket? Do I got a fish in stasis in my pocket? Is that how that works? Right? With an owl's feather, easy enough to find, steeped in wine. Yeah, your magic user's probably got a wineskin with him. So those things are covered, right? But having the spell components, that's another thing that's house rule. Well, that's dumb. Well, with 5th edition, I'm not sure the other editions, I don't remember so well, but that's the last one that I played, alternative to this one. They just went in, okay, everybody's got a spell focus. They got a wand or something they're carrying around that helps them cast a spell, so they don't need spell components. Well, that's your video game mentality of I get to have everything I could possibly have at my fingertips at all time. I don't want to have to think about logistics. Um, been a problem in my OA game with no history spell. Would be interested in your reaction to that spell. Um, it's kind of cool being able to know history. I guess the drawback to a no history thing is if you don't have a history set up as the dungeon master, that kind of spell will catch you. You got to make something up and write furiously down, write down notes and stuff like this. Well, there's where um, classes like Sage, your NPC Sage or your Bard later on, that's what they do. They know things. So hopefully, if you're playing a game, you've got enough detail fleshed into your world that those questions can be answered to a certain degree. Um, for your average dungeon crawl, you're just running back and forth to town just to go in the dungeon to get loot. No history really doesn't help you much, although it may help you figure out what items are. Figuring out what the history on this particular item could be useful. But if the last guy that carried it didn't know what it was either, knowing the history of the item isn't going to help you a whole lot. Yeah. Yeah. OP for a first level spell and a lot of work for a DM. Yes. So, my advice to that one is ban it, unless you've got something set up to account for it, Let's see. Death's Door, weapon versus armor type, weapon speed, encumbrance, spell components, training for levels, racial class maximums, gender based maximums, rest after being unconscious. All get, well, yeah. And house ruled away. Yes, they do. Yep. Exactly right. Just because that's I hate to say it, the video game mentality. I want everything I need at my fingertips without having to think it, go hunt for it or search for it. So I'm always ready for everything that comes up. And those players have never really learned how to manage logistics and how to resource management or things like this, so that they always have to have stuff ready and available. So we house rule all those other uncomfortable parts of the game away, so that it's constantly nothing but fun. And then after a while, that nothing but fun tends to get boring.
Very boring. Yes.
Flavor history of this gold coin. Thanks, DM. Now this coin. Yeah, you can go a little overboard with something like that. Yeah. Well, yeah. You don't want to know where that coin was. Yeah. Right. See, well, and here we go with house ruling, and there's a general principle. Removing level limits would require significant equivalent boon to humans. Now we're starting on a vicious circle. If we're house ruling away those things that were balancing parts that they put into the game to encourage more human play as opposed to non-humans, well, then you get into a spiral that you're constantly having to house rule and change things to fix things that you just broke. And it becomes a vicious cycle of, and then the Gary Gygax describes it as Monty Hall games, and that's what we heard it. What's behind door number 3? You know.
Yeah, exactly. And the level limits is a big one, and that's exactly right. And further, a world like say like Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms, even, or any world that you create that's supposed to be sort of representative of some kind of ancient version of Earth or something like that. Something that's kind of synonymous with our own Earth in lots of ways. It's impossible for it to exist. If level limits aren't a thing, and elves live for 1,000 years, dwarves live for 500 years, gnomes live for a couple 150 years, whatever, then those elves, the elves who decide to pursue magic, I mean, unless there's some sort of artificial limit on the maximum capability that anyone can have in the world, they're going to take over the entire society. And these are all human-centric worlds, and they can't be human-centric when you've got these creatures who are so long-lived that they can basically learn more and faster and for longer and to more power levels than any human is ever going to be capable of doing. Then the humans are basically slaves. I mean, that's how that world would end up playing out. The elves and the dwarves and the gnomes and even the halflings all outlive the humans by a large margin. So, what good are humans? And from a flavor perspective, not just the rules.
I mean, you got the guy from the other side of it's going to be arguing with you. Well, I mean, look, in Tolkien's elves, they didn't want to rule the world. Well, some of them did.
Yeah, exactly. And then they would also just leave, right?
Yeah.
And Forgotten Realms has that concept as well. What do they call it? They call it Evermeet, I think, in Forgotten Realms. I think that's what it called. The elves just sail off the side of the world, at a certain point in time and go to their own place. And I guess Ed Greenwood felt that necessary, even with level restrictions and stuff like that in place. He still said, okay, these guys leave, otherwise they're going to rule the world.
Well, you're right. So let's see. Talk a little bit about spells here and the spell descriptions and stuff here. Oh, final note. And this is another thing that is house ruled all the time. Remember that the reverse of any spell must be separately memorized and that each requires special components. Yeah, that's one of the more commonly house rule, and I do it a lot too, where, okay, you've got cure wounds memorized, but you'd rather slap somebody with a cause wounds, so you cast the reverse to the spell. Yeah, it is. That's another one of those things that's house ruled instead of making them memorize cure and cause. They just memorize the one and cast either one. Yeah, that's another one of those house rule pieces for the magic. Um, what else do I got? Let's see. Spellcasting during melee. Uh, Wanted to bring this up in here because of what the description was as far as spellcasters. Will always insist that they are able to use their powers during combat melee. The DM must adjudicate success of such use. Consider this. The somatic movement portion of the spell must be begun and completed without interruption in a clean, smooth motion. The spell as a whole must be continuous and uninterrupted from beginning to end. Once interrupted for any reason whatsoever, the spell is spoiled and lost just as if used. Spells cannot be cast while violently moving, such as running, dodging a blow, or even walking normally. They are interrupted by a successful hit, be it a blow, missile, or appropriate spell, not saved against or savable against. All right, thus, casting a spell requires that a figure be relatively motionless and concentrating the effort during the entire course of uninterrupted casting. For example, a magic user casting a fireball must be in sight of the intended area of effect during the course of the spell, although an associate could be there to open a door intervening between caster and target area at an appropriate time, provided the timing was correct, of course. Right. So, caster cannot begin a spell interrupted just prior to completion, run to a different area, and then complete the spell. Interruption instantly cancels it. Unless the spell has no somatic components, the caster cannot be crouching, let alone prone, during casting. Right. So all of these sorts of things are also heavily house rule, where we've got magic users charging into battle on horseback, casting all their spells. They're carrying all these things in their hands: lanterns, daggers. Where are they going to? Are they going to
Unconscious
grab their
bodies.
components out of their pouch? Right? Yeah. The only one that I would let them do that is if you're casting a spell off of a scroll, because the scroll contains the spell. Everything is all wrapped up into it, and even then, you got to be standing still in order to do so. Have you ever read something running? I have. I've not been able to. Right. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, these are just more aspects of casting that is house ruled or ignored or not even just considered or not even thought about. Right. Hey, we got Yang Exo coming to visit us. All right. Good to see you, Yang. Appreciate you dropping in and heckling us like Gonzalo likes to do. Right. So I can understand losing a spell when it's interrupted. So many times I've been telling a story when I'm interrupted. I cannot for the life of me remember what I was saying. Yeah, Joe, I don't know that that has anything to do with the interruption. I think that has something to do with the onset of advancing age. I'm,
I was gonna say I've never experienced that, so I don't know what you're talking about.
I totally forgot what we were talking about right here just now.
Yeah, me too.
Yes, Yang, let the heckling commence. Come on. Anytime you want to come back and have a chat with us, let me know. We'll pick a topic you'd like to chat with us again. So, spellcasting during melee. That's the only reason I want to bring that up here was some of the other things is here is it's commonly forgotten or not thought about is spellcasters must note what spell they intend to cast at the beginning of the round prior to any knowledge of which side has initiative. I think this is all based on the idea that everything starts at zero and starts ticking up. I do like the aspect of um, combat being a little more dynamic, that you may want to withhold beginning the casting of your spell to a little bit later in the round to account for timing. I like that. Try to keep it dynamic. Other things in here, like intelligent monsters able to recognize dangerous spells will direct attack against spellcasters if not engaged by other opponents, so as to be prevented so doing. Right. Spellcaster cannot use his dexterity bonus to avoid being hit during spellcasting. Doing so interrupts the spell. You're not going to be able to dodge out of the way of the missile that's flying at you. So those are some of the things to remember. They're either forgotten about or house ruled away. At the last sentence right down there at the bottom, let me highlight that one. Come on, you help me. All right, because spellcasting will be so difficult, magic users and clerics will opt to use magical devices whenever possible in melee if they are wise. Well, by definition, clerics should be wise. I think that would be the player's wisdom more so than anything else. Use that's what the magic item scrolls and stuff for. I regularly play with players in groups who hoard all their magic items. They hoard the scrolls, they hoard the potions. They don't use any of these things during the course of play. And there's that one cartoon that I absolutely love, the dungeon cops or whatever walking around. That's the skeletons that are walking their way through the dungeon with the Bobby's hats on and stuff. It's a hilarious little cartoon. And they come across adventurer bodies there, and they've got all kinds of loot on them, right? But they're dead because they never use the loot and stuff that they're carrying around. That's what those things are for. And experience points, if you follow, that's another thing that's house ruled pretty frequently is experience points. If you follow the rules for experience points, using those things gives you XP. More so, you get more XP off reading a scroll of magic missile than you do casting your spell magic missile. Right. So use those things. They're supposed to be in treasure hoards. That's you're supposed to be able to go and find more and stuff later. They're consumables. You should be able to pick up more along the way. Hoarding them doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Now let me be fair. I'm just going to play the other side of it because I've had the occasion to experience this more than once, and more often sometimes than others. Sometimes you never get as a player, or whatever. Your character never gets consumable items or magic items, or even sometimes you seldom get experience points. So it can be a DM problem too, right? If you're not giving out treasure, especially consumable stuff, I don't care. I'll hand out hordes of consumable stuff, because the idea is that they'll consume it and then they'll need to continue adventuring to gain more. Treasure's not bad. And giving out potions and scrolls and wands, especially since you have the tool as a DM to the tool of charges and a wand, staff, or rod. You can give somebody a wand of magic missiles, and hey, it's got 4 charges. But that can be immensely useful and also present some sort of player decision point. Are they going to use the last charge out of that wand, rendering it forever inoperable, or are they going to try to recharge it before doing so? So it leads to some interesting choices for the players, and that's what it's all about, tying back to resource management as a whole.
And here, Yang's got a point here. You still get XP for hoarding stuff. Yes, you get XP for hoarding gold. You don't get XP for hoarding scrolls. You don't get XP for hoarding potions. You don't get XP for hoarding magic items. You get XP for using those things. If you sell them, then you get the XP for the gold value that you sold them for. Right. And then let's see, here's my daughters coming in to heckle me a little bit here. If I use them now, what will I have when the bigger, badder boss comes along? Hopefully, and maybe you missed the beginning part of our conversation this evening, that you're wise with your resource management and decide when to use those items. Just because I've got 18 goblins charging me down doesn't mean I need to throw this particular spell off of this scroll right now, because where's their boss? I may need that for their boss. Whereas I could use it for, a minor spell or something like this, as opposed to, you have some idea what you want to try to accomplish in the game. Sometimes it's going to happen where you blow your wad at the beginning of the game, and then bam, and now you got nothing for when the bigger monster comes along because you didn't really account for it. That's part of the game too. And here's Yang. Wait, we get XP for using potions and scrolls. Buy the book. Buy the first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. You get XP for consuming potions and using scrolls. Yes, you do. Now, that doesn't mean that the dungeon master that you're playing with in that game hasn't house ruled that out of the way or doesn't do it, but that's part of it. All right, let's see. First and foremost, or I think he means fire and forget magic. Magic items with limited charge. It's all about resource management and tension it can bring. Right. Well, one of those things is when you pick up that wand, you don't know how many charges it has. If you successfully identify it, you may get some impression as to about how full it is. Okay, it seems to be about 3/4 full. That doesn't give you any idea as to how many charges those are. Is it 75 of those 100 on that wand, or is it 70, which is close to 3/4? It's That's the impression you get if you're successful through and through with all of the rolls you have to make with the identify spell on that. A sage can't even tell you exactly how many charges it has. He can do the same sort of thing and give you an estimate of how many it may contain. But you may be hovering, okay, I think I've got 75. Now you just used it your 74th time and poof, it crumbles into dust. Hey, didn't I have 75? No, you had about 3/4 of the charges in it. And you just blew them all. There's no way of actually knowing. So that's part of your resource management piece. Yeah.
Right.
Fire and forget. I mean, old fingers fail. That is, yes, they do. Yeah. You get XP for using unknown potions and items. I would give them to you because when you took the risk of drinking that potion and now you've got the effect on you. Hey, I figured out what it was. Right? It wasn't a poison. Great. But in order to use a magic scroll, you have to cast read magic so that you know the magic that's on that spell, right? On that particular scroll. So that's your identify for magic scrolls. And I need to save my scroll cure in case I think if Vecna shows up, cure light wounds is going to be the least of your worries. Yes. Let's see what else we got here. We got some excellent comments coming in. I believe my DM house rules a way to test potions in the field to do a poor man's identify. Yeah. Well, it's not house. That's not really a house rule. Joe, it is in the rule that in order to figure out what a potion does, you have to test it. You can taste a potion to get some impression. As I understand it, the rules is written. You can taste a potion to get some understanding of maybe what this thing might do. Oh, I bit my tongue earlier and now my tongue's healed. Maybe this is a healing potion, right? But you got to sample them to figure these things out. A mere sip of a poison to figure out what kind of potion it is enough to kill you. So you're taking a risk doing that sort of thing. All potions, as far as this game, AD&D 1E, they're all the same. There's no way of identifying a potion based on what it looks like, smells like, or anything. And they all smell like castor oil. Every last one of them, including the poisons, right?
Yeah, and it's page 125 where the actual magic items where they're talking about potions. That's where he talks about, even a small taste of the thing that generally you must sample the potion, and there's a reason for that, right? You must sample it to figure out what it is, and that any sort of sampling of it in terms of taste, should give you some indication of what it is. That doesn't mean as the DM you're going to come out right out and say, yes, well, this is a potion of cure moderate wounds or whatever. Versus a potion of cure light wounds or something like that. You want to be a little more, at least most people do, I do, want to be a little more cryptic in my description and have a little fun. But yeah, Now one thing that does typically, get house ruled in there is being able, taking it a little further and being able to talk about, sort of the viscosity of the potion, what, a different type of smell for it, a different type of color and all those kinds of things, but you have to taste it. It comes out and says that. I think there's a chart in the one of the appendices, right? That actually gives you some example smells and tastes and colors for various liquids and stuff like that.
There's a whole section of adjectives in there. Exactly. Use any of those sorts of things. Now, there are, if it's specifically in the description of the particular item that it's slightly different than the others, it'll be listed in that description. And if your players sit there and read through the Dungeon Master's Guide to figure out what all these magic items are, well, then, hey, they're cheating and whatever. I don't care. They ruined some of the surprise for them.
Well, and that's what cursed items are for, right? Oh
Yes.
yeah, you thought it did that. Well, that would be great if that was a girdle of giant strength, but it was the girdle of femininity or masculinity. So I'm sorry. Oh yeah, and you can't take it off.
Yep. Oh, at the helmet alignment change. Sorry, your paladin is no longer paladin.
Right, right, which is probably even worse.
Permanently. Yeah. Doesn't
Yeah.
remove curse doesn't fix that. Yeah. I like this one. What about cure dark wounds? Yes. Cure a potion of cure dark wounds or a scroll of cure dark wounds is what you need when you're battling Vecna. Yes.
Especially when you're fighting the darkness.
Fighting the darkness. Okay. Let's kick it over here. Oh. Progression on the combat tables. Here's another thing. Let me zoom in on this a little bit. Another thing that is house ruled quite often, right? A nat 20 always hits every time. I think, and it became, yes, the Dungeon Master Scribe does have to hit armor class 0 in it. It has it in the monster summary table as an example of an idea, a quick glance, a quick reference to give you some idea how strong or powerful that monster is, or something really fast to get you a quick result. It's not intended to take away from the progression on the combat tables. That a nat 20 doesn't always hit. A nat 20, natural 20, is required to hit some things, right? But you look on the table, and it's what this paragraph right here, the progression of the combat table explains, right? If it's just a 20, they say, here's his example, and I imagine he put this in here for this is what he used. A 20 die result plus bonuses to a total, just your first 20 that's anything. The second 20 on the list is you have to have a natural 20 to hit. So that gives you at least a chance of hitting some of those better armor classes, another 5 chances of hitting better armor classes. And then all of a sudden now, with a 21, you have to have a natural 20 plus at least a +1 bonus. You cannot hit that creature without a magical item, right? So all your natural 20s do you no good if you don't have that +1 bonus for the item to get to it. So along the lines, it was created somewhere down the road that a nat 20 hits everything no matter what all the time, and they didn't like the table, so they went to the THACO rule, and then the nat 20 hits everything, and it seems to a certain degree somewhat absurd to me too that I'm a 0 level fighter at best, right? Fencing with an Olympic expert fencer, there is no way I am hitting that guy 5% of the time. None. I'm probably never scoring a hit out of 100, let alone 5% of the time. So you can see somewhere along the lines where the absurdity of a nat 20 always hits kind of comes into play.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, now you might hit him if you throw the epee or whatever at him, and run away.
Throw it at him,
know.
yeah. He knocks it over, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll hit him every time if I use a shotgun. Yeah, that's another story.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, people like to feel, good and bad about specific results on the dice. They like to have the, ooh, yeah, natural 20, yay, critical hit or whatever. Or one, oh, fumble, your sword falls through your foot or something, kind of comedic relief. But those things don't really do much for AD&D. And they're of negligible use, and you can still feel good about
Mm-hmm.
any individual role, and you can do it in other ways too. You can describe those natural 20s if you want to give them a little bit of extra flair. You can describe those in a little more detail, particularly if they're killing blows or something like that. You don't have to use critical hits, double damage, 3 times damage, and all that. If the rule system was designed with that in mind for the game, then yeah, sure, that's fine. But AD&D wasn't.
Yeah. The only place I could find where he makes a recommendation, a house rule that he recommends, not necessarily recommends, but he puts in there is for saving throws. That's the only place that I can find anywhere in here where he suggests that maybe just if they roll a natural 20 on a saving throw, it's always success, period, no matter what the modifiers or anything are. That's the only time where he puts in that a natural 20 is always a success is for a save.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning too that a roll of 1 on a saving throw is always a
Always
natural
a fail.
failure.
And yeah,
A natural failure, yes, is
part of the
always a
game.
failure.
The same thing with
Yeah, it's not a. Go ahead.
yeah, combat's a roll of 1 is always a miss. Yeah, that's the only always in the game, a 1. Yeah. Cool. We've had some excellent comments tonight to spur on our discussion. Great. My daughter show up to heckle me a little bit. We got some friends on here asking some questions. Great questions. Were you able to locate anything about top 10 house rules, or did you get distracted?
Well, some of them I just put in the chat, right, and took a
Oh,
couple
okay,
of little
gotcha. Right.
notes here, right. So basically, death door, ignoring weapon versus armor class type
Mhm.
adjustments, ignoring the demi-human level limits. We've talked about the natural 20s, natural 1 type of thing. Initiative changes. There's always numerous changes to initiative. That's a big one, right? Is that hey, I roll my initiative and then my dexterity reaction attacking adjustment, reduces my initiative roll. But that's not so. It does that if you happen to be firing a ready missile weapon or whatever that round. Then it makes a reduction to your initiative, but not always. But people I see that all the time. Initiative minus my dexterity bonus for initiative rolls. But that's something that's supposed to apply specifically to, missile combat.
Mhm.
Yeah, the encumbrance, the training costs, the time
Yeah.
for leveling, the determination. And I know some people don't like to do it, right? Because it does seem like kind of a jerk thing to do. But rating the player on their play that goes
Yeah.
into the level and the costs, but if the player doesn't role play the character or assume the role of the character in this particular case, as well as like a thief not using his thieving abilities, a magic user
Mhm.
not using his spells and instead throwing darts all the time, then that player should be ranked in his play of that character at a lesser level than somebody who has no deviations, for example, from what the character's class is supposed to be doing. And therefore, the guy who did worse is going to have a longer training time. But a lot of those things are designed, in my opinion, to make the players better players. Surprise is the heck gets house ruled out of surprise, and the number of segments of surprise. You
Yeah.
see that all the time. You roll for surprise. Okay, you're surprised, and then basically a round of action takes place, and then it's a regular initiative. Um,
Right.
you know, the bed
That's
rest
pretty common.
when you fall unconscious. I just
Yep.
went through that right in a game. The bed rest, you fall unconscious. Hey, sorry, bud. You got 1d6 turns, meaning 10 rounds, a turn being 10 rounds, so 10 minutes. You've got 10 to 60 minutes of being comatose. And then after that, you can't do anything for 1 through 6 days except bed rest and very minor activity. No adventuring, none of that.
Right.
It's basically get your ass to the chopper and come back, after that time has
Right.
passed, right?
Yeah.
Um, you
Only in
know,
Hollywood do you get knocked out and then jump right back up and start fighting like nothing happened. Right.
yeah, right, right.
It-
And almost nobody uses psionics. You know,
but that's an optional
and
rule. Don't have to worry
psionics is
about
kind of an
psionics. Yeah.
optional thing.
Yeah.
Right, right. The unarmed combat and the grappling and all that stuff. And some of these things you don't blame them for house ruling, particularly if you can make it better. There's nothing to say that Gary Gygax was the end all and be all of everything, and he was always going to have the right idea 50 years ago, or the best idea for the game 50 years
Mm,
ago. Things can always be improved upon, but it's
sure.
the main important stuff that I think
Consider what
makes the
you're
game what it
changing.
is.
What does it break? Like you mentioned training costs, and I'll go into that a little bit here as far as training costs and stuff go. The cost of equipment, training costs, all that stuff was tied into the amount of gold that you get from a horde, or the treasure you're collecting was the amounts were balanced out so that when you did the training, when you bought your stuff, it depleted it an appropriate amount. If you get rid of those sorts of things, you make everything cheaper, you get rid of the training costs and stuff. Now your players are getting extra money they've got nothing to do with because you haven't adjusted the horde sizes to account for the outlay that they no longer have to do. Taxes, tithes, gate
Yeah, general
fees,
upkeep.
exchange fees, all that stuff was explained in the Dungeon Master's Guide to take that money away from them and give them an excuse to go get more, right?
Exactly. Now if you similar to not giving them plenty of magical items as treasure or experience points or whatever, if you as a DM don't actually give them any money or whatever, then it doesn't really matter. And there's some DMs that run sort of mudcore, real low fantasy types of things with AD&D, and I've done it before. I've built my own worlds that were real gritty and more Dark Sun like. I did a lot of that when I was a lot but younger in life, and I felt it was more real and more true if magic items and stuff like that were hard to come by. But if you're going to do that, you're probably better off using a different system. Another one, ability scores. So many people, it's become more popular since the advent of the OSR and particularly the OSR craze. But you got so many people who are 3d6 down the line. You roll 3d6 down the line for any type of creature in a game that I'm running, a game of AD&D, that thing's dead instantly. I mean that's just a fact. 3d6 it's fine, for older games, for OD&D for example. That's fine.
The way
But
it was designed, yeah.
um, yeah, but it's never recommended once or even optionally in the Dungeon Master's Guide or Player's Handbook
No.
or anything to use 3d6 down the line. Because it specifically says, hey, that's going to create an unplayable character for the most part.
Or less desired player character, right?
Right. Right, and you're going to be there all night. And that's the other thing with ability scores, not to really get on a tangent. Most people want, and most DMs and most groups want the players to generally play what they want.
Yeah,
So if you're using 3d6 down the line, there's virtually no chance of snagging a druid or a ranger or a bard or something like that. Let alone some of the multi-class characters. So what's going to end up happening during character generation is you're going to be having them roll multiple times, or you're just going to say no. That was your chance. You had a
yeah.
1% chance to get a paladin, and you didn't get it. Sorry. And then what's the player going to do? He's going to hate that character, get him killed, whatever. you know.
I
So
think
it's
one of the
it's
better adjustments to the game has been, hey, it because when you started, you played what you rolled, and it went from you play what you rolled to you try to roll up what you want to play. I think that was one of the better adjustments to the game. It kept people
yeah.
more interested. They're invested more in their character and stuff, so that when you did get killed by drinking that poison, it hurt more. So
Yeah, and as a player, you always have the option. If I want to just randomly roll up a character, and I want to say, hey,
yeah,
listen, no matter what everything says, I want to use 3d6 and roll it down the line, and then I wouldn't do that. But if
no,
I did want to do that and play a flawed character, or come up with something completely interesting for a particular type of game, that's al- always an optional thing. But it's kind of shoehorning that in to AD&D is a mistake.
no.
So yeah,
Well, if you
lots
do
of
that
lots
sort
of
of
house
thing,
rules that happen commonly.
we do that sort of thing. We need to bring the jester into the game. Yeah,
Yeah, the one that's actually basically really an idiot. Yeah,
yeah. that was a fun dive into some alternatives. So here we are talking about house rules and things like this, and I went ahead and I found this a few years back, and I thought this was interesting. So I dug up some house rules by the guy who wrote the game. Right, Gary Gygax's OD&D edition. Thought this was an interesting article that somebody put together with the differences that Gary Gygax did. He didn't run Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Gary Gygax played original Dungeons and Dragons with all the supplements. AD&D, and you're no way you're not going to convince me this isn't the case, is a collection of all his notes and all his information and all the original guides, edited a little bit, maybe tweaked a little bit for some of them, but AD&D 1E is OD&D put together. Yeah. So I went and found this. I saw this was some great things. So we can, some of the things were in this article, excellent. Sword and sorcery and gaming. But the main thing is he also was a section on here about commonly asked questions about Dungeons and Dragons. Here's about the thief rules that were added in a little later. Solo dungeon adventures. Right here's the first encounter with the random dungeon tables. Pretty cool. Let's see. Here we are. Questions most frequently asked about Dungeons and Dragons rules. Right here with some kind of a sage advice option that came through it. But Gary Gygax house rules, right? So we want to cover some of these, right? In 2005, Gary ran an OD&D campaign for his group. This is a compilation of notes about the rules for that campaign. The info was gleaned from Q&As and Gary's Q&A threads on EN World and Dragon's Foot, as well as some tales of the campaign posted by Dale Golf. All right. Rules. Only use the 3 little books, none of the supplements. Well, there goes some of those fun things like Thief, right? Character generation advanced.
Yeah.
Ability score is best 3 out of 4d6, right? So even here, he didn't use 3d6 down the line. He used roll 4d6, drop the lowest. Arrange scores to taste. So right here, your house ruling to roll the character you want to play, not play the character you roll. Right? Fighters get +1 hit point per die. So all PCs get +1 hit point per die if con is greater than 14. Right? Because the original Dungeons and Dragons rules constitution was a little bit different. No training necessary to get a level. Well, here you go. He house ruled training out of it as far as his game goes. But then again, I guarantee you he wasn't giving you as much treasure to account for the fact that he took away training. Right? D6 for surprise. Here you go. Gary even house ruled his own surprise rules. 1 round, 1 equals 1 round, 2 equals 2 rounds, 3 or more equals no surprise. So, 2 rounds of surprise can be hefty. Right? PCs must declare actions before initiative. That's been the same, right? Casters must declare the specific spell being cast. That's got really not much of a change there for that. A 1d6 for initiative, a time means simultaneous combat. He was always in favor of everything happening all at once. Right? I kind of like a more dynamic initiative arrangement. Right? A casting character who loses initiative will lose his spell if hit. Yes. Well, the original Dungeons and Dragons didn't have casting times, sort of. There was some of that stuff written into it that you started on this turn and it went off next turn, but that was about the limit of casting times for OD&D. Right? Combat, all PCs get 1d6 hit points per level. Hit point rolls are re-rolled on a 1. Right? So no matter what you roll, if Magic User rolls a 1 on his starting hit points, he gets to re-roll it. All fighters do +1 damage if strength is greater than 14, because the attributes didn't really matter so much in original Dungeons and Dragons as they do so much in AD&D. Dex does not affect armor class. Right? Dex does affect missile attack to hit rolls. Right? PCs are unconscious at 0 hit points. They can go as low as level +1 before death. Example, a 4th level fighter can be brought as low as -5 hit points and just be unconscious. A healing potion or cure spell restores them immediately, so he didn't have them get knocked unconscious and spend days resting. A healing potion or cure spell brings them up. I kind of, in some ways, I kind of like this idea a little bit, that is special. That is not natural healing or something. That magic or a healing potion is a special thing. Spells and magical items. To acquire new spells, casters must find scrolls, spell books, or a friendly high-level caster. You just don't automatically get a spell. You got to go hunt them down. Clerics don't need spell books. The original books can be read to imply that they do. They get their spells implanted on their minds at the beginning of the day by their gods or their gods' agents or something. They don't have to read them. My house rule is they have a prayer book, basically, that they can refer to for their spells. But they still go, they're basically petitioning for those that day. Let's see. Gary IDs most magic items immediately, charging large sums of money when they return to town to rest and recuperate for this service. Well, there's how he's taking their gold away from them, automatically telling them what the magic items are. All right, this is because the players are anxious to get back into the dungeon and don't want to bother with in-town adventures. Okay. I'll get it, yeah. Potions must still be tasted to ID, though. Because that's what poison's for. Unusual items require a trip to the striped mage. Basically, you go back and see a sage and figure out what these things are for you. All right, and then another page that's in here is Garagak's House Rules for 2007. Right? Not much of a change. Strength greater than 14, +1 to hit, and +1 to damage of a fighter. Intelligence greater than 14, +1 spell, +1 first level magic user spell. I like that one. I've incorporated a similar house rule into my game. That as a magic user with a 17 or 18 intelligence, he gets an extra first level spell. Wisdom greater than 14, +1 first level cleric spell. Right now, if you recall, in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, clerics get extra spells based on their wisdom. Magic users do not, based on their intelligence. So there's some ways here. Here's the balance in that idea out for OD&D. A dex greater than 14, +1 to AC, and +1 to move silently. Okay. That's all incorporated into the dexterity table in the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook. Con greater than 14, +1 hit points per hit die, same as fighter class, gets +2 if a fighter. That is because, again, original Dungeons and Dragons, your ability scores weren't as critical. Right, charisma greater than 14, +1 positive on reaction checks. All right, hit points. Characters are only unconscious at 0 hit points. For each level, character may have a minus hit point total equal to level. So first level PC is dead at -2, like we described before. When taking damage, allow -1 hit point per character level. There's another interesting house rule that's in there in this section was when you get struck, a 5th level fighter could absorb 5 hit points of damage. Whatever was over and above that was actually what got through. That's kind of an interesting concept there. Then again,
yeah, it is interesting.
Everybody was getting a D6 for hit points too. Fighters weren't getting D10; they were just getting D6. So this is some way of balancing that kind of thing out.
Yeah, and it's anytime, and I think most of us have at one time or another had the idea of a tying success or failure of certain things to number of character levels attained and those kinds of concepts. And when you tie it to that, you can actually come up with some pretty interesting results. And then the thing to remember here is that Gary's working with OD&D. He's a legend, right? So he's more than comfortable running the game with as few or as many rules as he wants. And the people playing with him, they're probably just happy to be there, all of them.
I'm playing Gary's game, great.
yeah, and some of this might have been feedback, he might, or just things he thought of, or The things that he just thought of spur of the moment, or feedback from players, or things that he considered, between games and decided to change things, or maybe it's just stuff he always wanted to do.
Well, I mean,
There's a very rules light system. You do these kinds of things in AD&D, you need to make some other considerations, as we've already talked about.
right. 2005, 2007. How many years had he been running the game when he
Right.
got to this point? I think he's got enough experience to understand what works, what doesn't work, and what little tweaks he can make, and to give his players the thought that they're getting something extra, right, and still maintain a good balance in the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you can still find this if you just search for this particular article, the Gary Gygax OD&D editions. You can still find this out on the internet somewhere, interwebs, and download it. There was another one which was the Gygax 75, but that was more along the lines of creating dungeons and things like this. There was another article. So there we go. We ran through some house rules. We ran through some magic that's improperly played, why it's heavily house ruled. Yep, John Collins asked Straight Mage again. And who was it? Joe Kaufman said, I just heard of the Straight Mage. That was someone in Gary's Greyhawk campaign. Okay. He probably had some powerful wizard or something out there that was rolling around, right? Just to take your money from you and do identifies and stuff for you. Sitting right there at the gate of the dungeon. You guys identified that yet? Drop your coins in my piggy bank here and I'll take care of it for you. Take some of your money away. So like Deckard came from Diablo. Yeah, I guess that would be a similar idea. Yeah. Perhaps that is where they got the idea for Deckard Cain in Diablo, was from the Straight Mage or some things that these guys had noticed. Because clearly the creators of Diablo knew Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. And they knew the absurdity of the cow level. Yeah. So. Yeah. Cool. I don't know if we got any more questions on here. Yang, I kind of agree with you that psionics just plain sucks, but in some ways psionics kind of doesn't. We'll do a whole episode sooner or later here strictly on psionics, and we'll bring you back on, I guess, at that time so you can poo-poo it while we're talking about it. How's that?
Yeah. And the thing about psionics, and that sounds like a lot of fun. The thing about psionics that needs to be remembered too is that there are monsters that have psionics, and they become either a lot less dangerous or or generally useless if you don't have some sort of psionics in the game, or have some sort of system in place beyond what's in the books to determine, okay, well, this monster is psionic. Let's just take a mind flayer, for example. You take that mind blast away from the mind flayer, and the mind flayer is no longer a mind flayer. He's a mind extractor, through the physical attack. But again, he's got to get up there in order to grab your face or your forehead with his tentacles and that are attached to his own face, right? But mind blast is actually the thing that's most dangerous about the mind flayer, regardless of spellcasting ability or anything like that. And you've got things like intellect devourers, brain moles, cerebral parasites, all that kind of stuff. And the utility of those monsters, or use of them at all, is going to be affected. Unless you figure out how those things, and you need to do that generally because not everybody's going to have psionics, figure out how those things affect people with the limited brain power of normal mortals,
Yeah, for the most part, with just about every monster in the book, psionics is always an option. Some of them are going to naturally have psionic powers, like demons and devils and things like this, if you use psionics. There is one monster that uses psionics, and that's the only thing it does, and that is the mind flayer. So even if you don't have psionics in your game, the ability of the Mind Flayer is basically a psionic blast. So even if you're not using psionics, if you got a Mind Flayer flavor, oh, great, can't talk today, must be having a stroke. If you have a Mind Flayer in your game, you are using psionics, period. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Stephen Kennedy says, I didn't use psionics or bards at my table. I like bards. I like the idea. It's just really difficult for players to get that far. But once they do, they've really made an accomplishment. And if you missed it, Dooms and I did go over alternative classes that came out of the Dragon magazine, and that was one of the ones that Dooms wanted to pull out was the bard that was listed in the Dragon magazine. If you go back and check that episode out, we talk a little bit about that one. I like the original bard. He liked that one, so we'll agree to disagree. But I think that one that was in the magazine kind of covered it pretty nicely too.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you the ability to actually be a bard right off the bat, instead of having to go through 12 levels in order to do it, or 11 levels, or yeah.
Yeah, it does make it tough to get that far. You got to be able to survive that long. One of the benefits of being able to survive that long is as you're accumulating hit points, you don't lose them switching classes. Yeah.
Right. But on the other hand, you actually have to survive that long as a player, because we've all played in games, where
you start as a
you'll
fighter,
have
so you
a
got the
year or two, yeah, a year or two of game time. Especially the older you get, and the more responsibilities you might have. Where a year or two of game time, at a higher level, you might gain one level in a year, or one level or a couple of levels in a year or 2 years or whatever, and you got to have a 20-year campaign, to have like a 12th level character,
Quit whining and show up on game night.
Right.
All right. I don't know. I pretty much went ahead and said everything I got to say as far as magic goes and house rules and stuff. Anybody got any? I'm afraid to bring it up, but where did you land on Bless? Ah, that's right. That's one of the questions that you had come up on. Let me see if I can find my player's handbook and let me look up Bless real quick. Go ahead and read that one out. Oh, come on. It always does this when I start it up. Okay. Wants me to buy Adobe Acrobat now. I'd love to find an older version that doesn't make me want to have to buy it every time I open up Adobe.
Yeah.
It said the Bard and the Hyperborea is a solid class. Oh, what is this one? Next Warlock I play is going to have Taco Bell as patron exclusively drink Baja Blast to power the spells. Thanks for that. So awesome. Bard and Hyperborea is a solid class. I'll have to read Hyperborea. I've heard some good things about the game. I just haven't spent any time on looking at it. All right, Bless. Zoom in on Bless here, and I can't load Player's Handbook in, and it's too big for us to go. Upon uttering a Bless spell, the caster raises the morale of friendly creatures by +1. Furthermore, raises their 2-hit dice rolls by +1. A blessing, however, will affect only those not already engaged in melee combat. This spell can be reversed by the cleric to a curse upon enemies, which lowers morale. Reverse. Remember, you got to memorize the reverse. You can't just arbitrarily do it. To a curse upon enemies, which lowers morale and to hit by -1. Caster determines what range, up to 6 inches, he or she will cast a spell, and it then affects all creatures in an area 5 inches square centered on the point the spell was cast upon. In addition to the verbal and somatic gesture components, the Blessed spell requires holy water, while the curse requires sprinkling of specially polluted water. The question here is the duration of 6 melee rounds. Here we see this is the only spell in the book where it says melee rounds. Everything else, it says rounds. So When can you cast this? The duration is in melee rounds. Do you cast Bless, walk around in the dungeon for hours, and then it doesn't start ticking off until you get into combat and thus melee rounds? Or is that a typo? Is that an editing error? What's, so there's one of those things that's a little bit ambiguous, but because it's the only reference to melee rounds in the entire book, I would say that was just a mistake. It's rounds, period. Rounds were considered melee, and turns were turns, and they was considered a combat turn and then a non-combat turn, and they decided, well, let's just change the words of what they're called to make them differentiated, and it was an editing thing that kind of fell out of the way. Just my opinion on it. So maybe
Right, and it would be sorry, it would be contradictory language in there, I think, if that was the intent, to say that it only affects characters not engaged in combat, right? So not engaged in melee already. Okay, so let's say that it can only be cast in combat. So I cast it in combat. Now there might be other times that you can cast it, but it's not like it's in a period of stasis or something, while you're walking around until a melee combat begins. So you could cast it and gain, minimal buffs, I guess would be the word, minimal buffs while out of combat, and its real utility is within combat. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that it only kicks off when combat starts, because it specifically says that it only affects those not already in melee combat, so its utility would be drastically reduced. And it may be one of those things that was copy pasted out of OD&D. And if we kind of look at the order that things are in the player's handbook, Bless is like what, like the first spell in chronological order, because I think it starts with cleric spells and then
yeah,
first
it
level
does.
spells, and Bless
Starts
is
with
the
cleric
very
spells,
first
and
one.
Bless is the first cleric spell that's on the list. Exactly right.
He
So
might have said, "Hey, I'm going to call these melee rounds to further differentiate this from OD&D." And then as he continued typing, he forgot that, or said, well, it doesn't really apply to this one. Doesn't really apply to this one. And then as you go down through the list, anybody who's done long edits or writing of things that are supposed to have sort of a faceted kind of classification and specifications and stuff knows how hard it is to continue to follow those specifications throughout the whole work.
no, for North of the Rockies answer here, the melee rounds were also mentioned, but not in relation to spells. Melee rounds are also mentioned in relation to melee combat. Um, but this is the only reference I can find of it that is in the spells section where the duration of a spell was listed in melee rounds. All the rest of them are listed in just rounds. Now, melee rounds shows up in some of the descriptions in a couple of places, but not very many. So I'm thinking melee rounds and rounds are just basically the same thing. It's the melee round is a 1 minute duration. A round is a 1 minute duration. So I don't think the word melee being in there makes it special. Just
Yeah, and
my
I think you
opinion,
would
and
have
that's how the
found
way I
that.
play it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you would have found that if that were the intent. I think you probably would have found that in prior stuff. You would have found that in BX. You would have found that in Holmes. And to the best of my knowledge, you don't find that in
So you're
either of
saying
those
that
locations.
BX and Holmes are better edited?
Well, and I guess I shouldn't say if BX is prior to it, but sort of a long uh, with the advent of AD&D. But um, I'm just saying that if the intent was a specific usage like that, I think that you would find more than just the insertion of a single word in one line in the stat block for it, right? They would have described that more in some
Similar,
other edition of the
you
game.
would have described the bless spell similar to the way you describe chant. Chant is you start casting it, and at the end of your casting, one turn, 10 minutes. At the end of the 10 minutes, you can maintain the chant as long as you remain motionless and continue chanting. Right. So
Right.
It was to put in there into the description of it how long it lasted, when it started to go off and stuff. It was described in there. Whereas that kind of wording isn't in the bless spell. It's just the one section of duration of melee rounds. Let's see. Duration in OD&D is an hour, where AD&D would only be 6 minutes. Yes. Right. Where there was a difference in times and stuff as far as original Dungeons and Dragons was concerned and stuff too. Um, difference. You'll notice a lot of the things that came over from OD&D into AD&D were reduced in duration and stuff like that as well. Not just that particular spell, but a lot of them were kind of, I hate the word, use the word nerfed, but they kind of were nerfed a little bit in there. Yeah. I don't mind the idea of a bless lasting an hour. That seems kind of nice, right? But then again, as a game master, I would only have an encounter come after you every hour and 10 minutes. So, all right. Well, let me go ahead and remove that from the stage. Well, I think I've pretty much got what I've got. We've got some excellent questions and stuff in here. We've been trying to answer and keep up with all these fantastic comments. Um, appreciate everybody hopping on and joining us and going into this house rules adventure. I'd like to get into OD&D. Have you played much? OD&D, the first ever dungeon master that I ever played with back when I was 14 years old had a heavily house ruled original Dungeons and Dragons game. He based most of the game after the original 3 books and house ruled a lot of the rest of it. So sort of played OD&D with him. It's great. All this stuff was house ruled, but he thought about everything, and all that stuff balances fairly well. The only other time that I've actually played OD&D was a couple years back. I had my daughter here with her boyfriend, and I made them sit down with me, and we made some characters and played original Dungeons and Dragons using the chainmail combat rules. And we just ran through an encounter with it because I kind of wanted to see how all that stuff worked in reality. So that's my whole experience actually playing OD&D. Would I? I would. It's a lot simpler set of rules. It's a little bit easier. Um, Still got to keep hold of logistics and things like this, but some of the things are a little bit different. Let's see. OD&D Arduin is pretty solid. The two of them together, I would imagine, pretty good. Arduin had a lot of some of the things that original Arduin did differently. For example, like I think I covered it before, was the fireball spell. And the Arduin, if it does 6 dice of damage, all 6 of those dice of damage are divided up amongst everybody that's in the blast. Everybody doesn't get 6 dice of damage individually. If it did 22 points of damage, 22 points of damage were divided amongst everybody that's in the fireball. So it kind of made the fireball kind of weak against multiple characters. That was one of the things that I remember from reading Arduin. But there was a lot of detail that they put into the Arduin Grimoire, and the whole world set up and everything. It was great as far as a good read on how to piece together a really good world. Let's see. Poor Orc Child started OD&D in '77, found a white box set in a hobby store. Cool. Hopefully you still got that white box set. That would be fantastic. So what is your favorite house rule there, Doom Swords?
Yeah, that's kind of hard to say. My favorite house rule uh is more house ruling entire subsystems, right? So my favorite house rule is messing with initiative. and segmenting everything out. And at some point,
Yeah.
I'll show people what I mean by that, because just talking about it would be kind of dry and confusing. But it's and I intend to publish it at some point. But I like to lean very, very heavily on segments in the round because I think that's what entirely differentiates AD&D from basically any other game.
Sure.
1 minute rounds is a huge deal. Yeah, it's fine, and there's hints of sort of the um, tactical design philosophy in these books.
Hmm.
With regard to segments, you'll find some magic items, like a crossbow speed, or like a what's another one? There's a few of them, and even potions. They talk about the number of segments that it takes for a potion to take effect. Um,
Yeah.
and sometimes he'll refer to, hey, it's going to be at least a couple segments to pull this potion out of a pouch, or maybe 5 or 6 segments if he wants to pull it out of a backpack. Well, that doesn't really mean anything if segments aren't more heavily leaned on. So it's sort of an entire uh, subsystem change more than it is an individual house rule. Um,
I mean, I got that right in front of
it
me.
was that.
Potion 1d4 plus 1 segments to activate, 1d4 plus 4 turns in duration. Staves were 2 segments to activate, recharge for 8. Wands, 1 or 2 segments to discharge. I love that part of it because that when you get into just like you, that's my favorite house rule is timing in combat. How do I make it look a lot more dynamic? You've got casting times, you've got all that stuff in there. Use it and make the fight a lot more fun, exciting
Right,
kind of
and
thing.
yeah, and a lot of people will say, yeah, but it's 1 minute rounds because it takes so long. There's the feints and the parries and the thrusts and the
Yep.
jabs that are so
Mhm.
often mentioned. Well, that's fine if you've got a group of fighters, but it's also going to mean, since spells have casting times and such,
Mhm.
it's also going to mean, and since by the book there's only really 2 types of movement in combat, and that's closing into a combat or charging into combat, and then everything that happens within the little 10-foot engagement zone. Basically, the fighters are sitting there trying to parry through. Everybody else has already gone, done everything they can do. Magic user has cast his magic missile. It only took him a segment. He's not going to close into combat. You know,
Mhm.
casting a spell is like the only action that he can do in the round. Yeah, maybe he could activate a magic item, but you would have to house rule that as well, and codify, how that's going to happen.
Mhm.
So a 1 minute round without leaning into segments, I think that's really the biggest mistake of AD&D. If I were to say that AD&D made a mistake, it would be not digging into that more. And as we've talked about, privately and on stream, most likely, Lynn Lakofka,
Mhm.
had
Oh, yeah.
his ideas in initiative. We saw some of the stuff that Tim Kask had influence on in the Eldritch Wizardry, like dexterity initiative system or whatever's in there. Um,
Yep.
so the initiative could be a lot more complex. If I was going to boil it down to the first part of that, though, one thing is that I prefer individual initiative for the players, which does directly go against what's indicated in the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Would be.
Initiative is rolled for the whole group. Yeah,
Yep.
sure, you could roll it individually, but it's highly not recommended. But I do it, especially when we're talking about VTTs and stuff,
Mhm.
or other pieces of software aid, even when you're in person. Um, it's easy enough to keep track of that. You know,
Yep.
and that adds to the dynamic nature of a
Yeah.
combat as it unfolds.
Yeah. So house ruling dynamic combat is probably one of my favorite too. But second to that, my newfound favorite is an extra first level spell for a intelligent magic user. Gives them a little bit extra to start the game.
Yeah, yeah, I like that too. And a lot of the house rules that I end up with are things that I see other people do, and I think I'll probably end up using something like that myself, because the one spell for the magic
Mhm.
user, especially, you know, starting out with, say, 2, maybe 3 hit points or something, and then having one spell and having that spell interrupted so you lose it, is no good.
Yeah, he's not going to roll. He's not going to roll a magic user for his next character. No.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just yeah, he might not ever play again. Right? So yeah, if we go back to Men in Magic from OD&D, because I was trying to look it up here. The bless spell, I mean, I really think it's just Gygax expanding on what was in there, because the bless spell in Men in Magic from the OD&D box set, during any turn the prospective recipients of a bless spell are not in combat. The cleric may give them this benison. A blessing raises morale by +1 and also adds +1 to attack dice. The spell lasts 6 turns. You know, I think he was just trying to say, particularly since it shows up first, I don't want to beat the dead horse on this, but I think he was just trying to differentiate there and say that, hey, this thing lasts for six rounds,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and how am I going to tell all these people who are familiar with OD&D that that turns and rounds have different types of meanings between the systems, right?
Yeah, I should have
Lots
made
of
better
people do
notes.
that, yeah.
Should have made better notes. Here's one of the things I was going to talk about too that Stephen Kennedy just brought up. You start your first level character with max hit points. I do. Yes, that is another very common house rule: is starting all your player characters out with max hit points. To the point where it frustrates me. No, I don't normally do that, but most of the virtual tabletops that I've played with, the rule sets, that's what they do. And I
They
can't
do
figure
it
out how to.
automatically.
I can't strip that code out of it. I don't know how to get that done, so I just let it go. Start them out. It's another really common house rule. Start everybody out with max hit points, because it's really
Yeah.
kind of sucks as you roll at that first level fighter and roll a 1 on your die
Oh,
for your hit points, and you don't have a con bonus, right? Oh,
yeah, and I like that brings up something else I picked up. I picked that up from Dungeon Master D, even though I played with him lots. I mean, for I don't know 40 years now. Over time, the is his house rule on hit points where you roll the die, and if you don't like the result, you can roll again, but you have to keep the second result. So it's almost like a sort of an advantage system, sort of like a 2d20 system, but for hit points. But I feel like the best house rules add meaningfully to the game, and seeing somebody roll a 5 on a d8 and say, nah, I'm going for it, and then getting a 1 or a 2 is, hilarious. But when they're on a 4, it's even worse. And sometimes it works out well, and sometimes it doesn't work out so well for the player. But it's interesting, and it's a meaningful choice, and prevents, because there really is nothing worse than gaining a level. You've got a +4 con as this awesome fighter, and you've been waiting a year to get like 6 level or something. You roll that d10 and you get a 1, and you
mhm.
think, well, I'll just get level drained, whatever, and I'll gain the experience back. And then the DM's
Try
like,
it
no,
again.
you keep, yeah, you keep the roll that you got from the previous, and it's like, I'm just stuck with this forever. You know, that sucks. Well, better luck next year. Yeah,
Right, right. Stephen Kennedy's first level so brutal anyhow. It can be, yes, it can, especially if you murder hobo everything all the way through the entire game. First level is going to be brutal. If you run a lot and try not to get into fights that seem to be a little outclassed for you, then first level is not as bad. It just takes you longer to get out of it. Sometimes fortune favors the bold, sometimes fortune does not, and you roll new characters. So yeah, it is not a bad house rule to allow max hit points on first level. Not a bad one at all. It doesn't really unbalance too much, other than the fact that, well, I'm gonna let all my low level monsters be max hit points. How's that sound? Yeah.
yeah.
Oh
Right,
no, no, no,
right.
no!
See,
Can't do that. Can't do that.
right. No, those have to be an average, or you have to roll those. As a matter of fact, roll those in front of us. Yeah, yeah. That's another thing. It increases the survivability of the player characters, but if the survivability of the monsters is not also upped, I mean, that's an excellent point.
Hmm. Yeah.
And if
If
you're
you
going to do
make a
that, then why
rule, it
even
should
bother?
apply to both
Hmm.
sides. Yeah. Uh, see what else we got here.
Yeah, good old keep on the Borderlands.
I like that. It's a good one. I like. The only thing I don't like about Keep on the Borderlands is everything is too close together. It should be a little more spread out. All of them in the valley, they would have killed each other off
Right, right.
because they hated each
Well,
other.
and
The
then you've got
factions, they hated each other. They were a steady stream of beating each other up. Right? All you really had to do as a player character was, throw a flaming oil potion in the orc lair and just run and sit back and watch them kill each other off as they invaded one another's little little places. Because which one of you guys threw it, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well,
No, if you end up using that, I mean, they're still probably too close together. But if you end up developing some sort of faction play out of that, where these, each of the factions of humanoids and different monsters, the Minotaur, these types of things, have different motivations and clever
yeah,
player characters play them against each other, then that that's one thing that the close proximity of the monsters could be used for. But the other thing about keeping on the Borderlands, you've got the caves of the unknown right there on the map, so you're kind of in a tough spot if the party's searching for rumors or whatever. They hear about caves of the unknown, and then they're like, that sounds a whole lot more interesting than these caves of chaos over here. So we're gonna go check those out. You know.
Ooh, any spells in particular that you change? Good question from Joe. Change? Um, adjust maybe a little bit based on like chant. I like the idea that chant, when you begin chanting, that's when the effects start to happen. That's when the magic starts to come in. So it makes it a whole lot more useful spell. However, you still cannot be moving around. You have to stand there and do your Hare Krishna stuff right out in the wide open where everybody else can see you and start shooting you with your arrows to get rid of that sort of thing. Um, so I changed that. That's about the only spell that I really change. I've adjusted identify a little bit as far as the house rule goes. The way it's written is you have to identify that magic item as soon as you get it out of the hoard. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to identify it. You wait too long, all the impressions on it have been picked up by characters handling it and things like this. I house rule it to the point where, yeah, you grabbed all these magic items, you stuck them in a bag. You can identify them later as long as nobody's been using them in the meantime. So that's the change that I make to identify. I still make you do the pearl. I still make you save versus magic. I'll only give you one or two properties out of it, depending on how well you do. Right? But for the most part, that's off the top of my head. Those are the only real two changes that I've made to spells.
Yeah, and I don't make changes to the spells sort of like that way, but I do. It's very important to me to fix inconsistencies, right? So that's something that I do, and I've got a project in the works. All these projects take so long, or seem to take so long, and then I look squirrel and go do something else or whatever, because focus can be a problem. But I've been sort of rewriting these spells to make them more easily understood and more useful. Because yes, it's great if I'm reading protection from evil. It's great that I've got a block this long that gives me all kinds of flavor and all that kind of stuff. But if I'm sitting at the table, particularly as a newer type of player, it's a wall of text. um and I think formatting can be improved. But something that I would point out as a consistency issue is that all of the detect spells, and I'm not going to list them all out, right? But we've got detect magic, detect evil,
Mm-hmm.
detect what pits and snares or whatever it is. um
The detect traps.
all of
Yeah.
those, yeah, Yeah, all of those I handle the same way. You know that it's a 10 foot wide field, just like the where is it? Just like detect
Detect
evil,
magic. You
or detect
detect
magic.
magic is
Yes.
like you're shining a torch through the hole, and whatever falls on the beam glows to indicate that it's magic or whatever. And it's certain layers of protection will hide it from you. Yeah, and that's not a bad
Right.
way of making all detect the same sort of thing, because it just makes it simpler for the players to remember, for you to remember. You know.
Yeah, and the primary idea there is that they all have a range, but they don't all say the same thing, and it doesn't help that when you get to a magic user version of detect magic, for example, it says, "Hey, refer back to the cleric version," and then you got to flip back and look at that.
Hmm.
But there, I make them all 1 inch path, so 10 feet wide,
Yeah,
extending out to their range, and the caster can turn 60 degrees per round, to change the direction of the spell for the duration
sure.
of the spell. And once you read them all kind of side by side and piece them together, I believe that was the intent. So any changes I make to that stuff and consistency in that stuff, I try to be real thoughtful about the spirit of the rules, and try to follow that as best I can.
Right. That's why I think, like I mentioned earlier about concentration, kind of distill all the descriptions of concentration in there and kind of make them all kind of the same. Even though Wall of Fire says you can't move, I think maybe I might like leave that one. You can't move while you're concentrating Wall of Fire, because the amount of concentration that's required to keep that Wall of Fire going roots you to the spot. Whereas when your fly spell takes, like the description says, takes no more concentration than would walking. Now that magic user is assumed to be not chewing gum at the same time. So
Right, right. Well, and even if we look at page 65, right, with the spell casting during melee that you looked at,
yeah.
it says in there, it says, hey, you can't generally be walking around and concentrating. What does it say? Spells cannot be cast while violently moving, such as running, dodging a blow, or even walking normally. Um, so you've got a contradiction right inside here. And I
Hmm.
think that's, hey, Dungeon Master's Guide came out. People are asking me all these questions about spells. So let me take tonight to type up all the differences to the spells and all the unanswered questions. And then in a separate part of the book, write something totally different, is that concentration can't be done while walking at all, which nullifies the whole point of putting it in, or makes it sort of a moot point for a wall of fire specifically.
Hmm.
So yeah, you have to look at all this stuff, take the whole of it, distill it down like you said, and try to maintain the spirit and be consistent.
Of course, Wall of Fire is a little bit higher level than Chant. So,
Right, right. Yeah, but chant, if you can walk around with chant and you don't necessarily have to worry about how long it takes to cast or these kinds of things, it's a completely different combat experience
right.
than if you can't walk with it, because it's a pretty powerful spell.
As a druid, I've gotten a ring of fire that moves with me. Yes, you can. That is one of the effects of the spell, but it moves with you, and you can't wall anything away with it or something like that. Which I've player characters that I've had casted, that's what they used it for, as a trap, right? Whereas if it moved with them, your enemy could fly over the top of it or something like this, because when you moved, you left an opening for them to get out the door and then over the top of it when they fly, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, cool. Great questions. Good, excellent, extra stuff in here. Let's see. Two different listings of concentration too. I made some quick notes. Fly spell, right? Plus um, the broom. You can't cast spells while you're trying to hang on to the broom, but you can cast spells if you're on a carpet of flying, as long as it's not moving quickly. So some adjustments and stuff in there that kind of makes some logical sense. If you're hanging onto that broom, waving your hands around in the air and precise movements and motions. Um, I kind of picture casting spells to a certain degree to look like somebody's doing Tai Chi.
Right.
Precise movements. They're not standing still, just their arms. There's their feet, their foot placement, and things like this that are going on. Yeah.
That's the whole point of the
Mm-hmm.
somatic component, right? If the somatic component was exactly the same for every spell, why even have it? If
Yeah.
the material component for a spell, for example, was, hey, you need to keep 100 gold piece pearl, and that's the material component for all your spells, why even have it? There's no point to that.
No,
Um,
but some of the different items and stuff that you need to cast your spells, those make some great quest items and things like this too. That I'm struggling to find a story to what can I do for my players. Hey, wait a minute. This dungeon they're going into, they're going to want this spell to get in there, but they need this particular chunk of this stone from somewhere, and it's not a common piece of jade or something like this. So now they got to go on a quest to find that jade in order to cast that spell. So it gives me extra story hooks and stuff to help them out with.
yeah, and spell components and material components in particular are a lot of fun to just read, because I'm sure many other people have noticed this, maybe everybody, but Gygax and other people took special or paid special attention to the material components in a lot of cases, to where it's there's a little sort of a little inside joke there, or it's directly relevant, like a lightning bolt, like a piece of fur and a bit of amber. The idea is you would scratch those together to create static electricity, which would transfer through. Like whichever spell has the two metal cans or whatever are tied together by a piece of rope. That
Message.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, message. It's
Right.
there's you can have a lot of fun just reading the material components and figuring out exactly what he was getting at, because some of it's real on the nose, but some of it's not.
Here, let's answer Joe's question here. Random thought, but would detect magic detect adventurers in a rope trick? No, it would not detect adventurers in a rope trick. It would detect the rope trick, but it wouldn't be able to tell you what's going on inside the rope trick, um, because those adventurers are in a pocket dimension. So you'd pick up the fact that there is a spell going on right here. There's something hanging in the air 30 feet up there. I don't know what it is. Detect magic tells me there's something there, right? I think that's what he's getting at there, right? Oh, look at that. There's 8 magic swords up there, a couple of magic arrows. Somebody's got a ring of flying, and no, it's just a spell cast in
Right.
that area caused some disturbance in that particular location. That's all it would tell you, as far as that's the way I would say.
Yeah, well, it's no different than like a portable hole or a bag of holding, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I detect magic on a portable hole, the portable hole is magic, but I don't see everything that's inside. And the portable hole just is a pocket dimension, portable
Yeah,
pocket dimension. Bag of holding, same way. I detect magic on the bag. I don't know what's in it, you know?
I don't care. I'm going to pick up that bag of holding and take it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Anything
unless,
that's magical, I'm taking.
unless I am in B1, which was mentioned earlier, then I am not picking up anything that looks like it might be a bag of holding.
Right. Don't get into a bag of devouring,
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
my
I've got the
Friday night group. I ran them. They ran them through B2, and then they ran through B1 afterwards. And the thief that I had in the group had to drop out, so one of the guys in the group was running him as an NPC after that. Well, he found the bag of holding and he hid it from everybody. And they were looking around some other spots, and he went around the corner in a room that nobody else was watching him. So I'm going to look inside this bag of holding and see what's in there. Yes. Everybody's wondering what happened to the thief. He's gone.
Yeah,
Thief is
right.
gone. You heard a scream, and then that was the end of it. He's gone. That was fun.
Bad news.
Let's see. In real life, I keep searching the known for things I've misplaced. That's why I need fantasy adventures. If I can't find it, I probably don't need it. It's gone. We're done. I'm going to go find something different. Yeah. I got 2 sets of card keys. If I lose both, then I'm in trouble. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Been there.
One day I'm going to lock them in it because the key fob I got is not one of the newer ones that won't let you lock the door while it's inside. So that'll be fun. I got to walk home to get the other key. All right. All right, here we are, up 2 hours. Man, when the two of us get together, we blow nonsense for 2 hours straight.
Yeah.
And I'm loving doing this every minute. This is a blast. These are some great guys asking some great questions. And this has been a lot of fun to do. And hopefully these guys they're enjoying us because they're here listening to us and throwing questions and stuff after us, you know.
Right.
So like we've said before, anything you guys want us to check on, to talk about, got questions on that you'd like to hear our take on, things like this, throw it in there. We're always looking for new things to talk about. We've still got orange spine books that we want to get back to and talk more about some of those. So we'll probably look at getting back into a couple of those here sooner or later. But in the meantime, you guys get any questions at all on anything you want, throw us a question on these videos. Every now and then I'll throw up a poll. I'll try to do another one of those about things you might want us to talk about. And I'll pop one of those on here or there, or just DM us or something like this. So we'll be back again next Thursday with another wonder of 2 hours of absolute nonsense. Show about nothing was already taken, so we can't use that one. So it's just 2 hours of absolute nothing. So thanks. Appreciate you guys joining in and watching us. I'm going to go ahead and let Doom Swords go because he's eyeing that bowl of peanuts really closely there.
See you later.
Yeah. Hey, thanks a lot for joining us here at Great Old Ones channel yet again for more talk about First Edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. If you've got a mind to, I do have a Buy Me a Coffee, and I will thank Dungeon Master D yet again. I can't thank him enough for being my first official supporter. Anything you guys want, like and subscribe, add comments, stuff like this, and we'll be back for more. I'll continue to do this as long as I get people that'll listen to me drone on about role-playing games. So without further ado, thank you all very much, and I will knock this one out. Good night.